You can retire on Social Security. Chapter 15, The Truth About Medical Costs in Retirement. Every year, Fidelity releases its study on the cost of healthcare in retirement. Every single year. I remember using the study when I just started out as a broker in 2005 in the seminars I did. Back then, the costs were only around $180,000 or so. Now those costs are nearly $300,000 due to inflation. And every single year, folks in the financial services industry use this study to scare people to saving more and working longer. Here is a recent tweet from Jonathan Clements warning us about the cost of healthcare and retirement. 20 June 2019, he tweets this at 4:30 a.m. A 65-year-old couple retiring in 2019 will spend an average of $285,000 in today's dollars on their retirement medical cost. Estimates Fidelity Investments. That does not include long-term care costs. The irony of this tweet is that this is from the same guy who attacked the financial services industry for years while at the Wall Street Journal. In fact, he even wrote an article titled, "It's Time to End the Financial Advisor's 1% Fee." A few years back, he actually joined a firm that charges over 1% fee to his clients. See my own article here on this. Just more proof that money talks, I suppose. So if Clements and others' assertions are true about the cost of healthcare and retirement, is there a solution? Of course there is. And thankfully, Fidelity tells us, quote, to help fill a gap in saving for healthcare expenses, considering increasing contributions to your tax advantages accounts. Invest more money, they say. Of course that's solutions. That's how they get paid. Interesting that no one in the financial services business mentions that is what is obvious, at least to me, about a very simple way to deal with these healthcare costs in retirement. Fire your advisor. In fact, I did a video here which shows how if Karen fired her advisor, she would save $369,000 in total fees over the course of her retirement. That is money that can go towards her Medicare Part B, Part D, supplemental policy, plus out-of-pocket expenses, co-pays, even some long-term care costs. Odd the investment industry never makes that connection, huh? For the record, I take issue with the Fidelity study because what they don't show. They don't mention that the average retired couple will need over $500,000 for food, or over $800,000 for housing, or over $300,000 for transportation. To use a lump sum today to estimate a future annual expense is just silly. No other way around it. Secondly, why focus solely on healthcare? After all, healthcare is not even close to the biggest expense most retirees will face. Here's a video I did on that exact topic, by the way. Well, because no one would take a study seriously that declared the average couple will need $500,000 for food over the course of their retirement. People know they have to pay for food, and that food is a daily cost. So there isn't a fear of the unknown that exists with food like there is with healthcare, and that's the rub for me. These people are preying on the fear of the unknown. Just go back to Table 21 in Chapter 11 and see the actual expenditures for retirees. Healthcare is not even in the top 3 of all expenses for households over 55 years old. It's only when the household is above 75 does healthcare become a top 3 expense. And even then, healthcare is just a tad more expensive than transportation and food and still way behind housing at total cost. But let's take a moment to identify how Fidelity came up with that $285,000 amount. The average 65-plus retiree should expect to pay about $5,000 a year on healthcare premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. I have no problem with this finding, by the way. It's in line with the BLS numbers show, too. In fact, just look how this breaks down. $135 a month in Medicare Part B premiums, $35 a month in Part D, $150 a month for Medicare supplemental policy, factoring co-pays, dental costs, vision, etc. And there's your $5,000 a year expense. Easy. But again, why the focus on this cost from the doom and gloom types? You need to eat 3 meals a day, no? How much does that cost? If each meal costs $5, you'll spend $5,475 a year on food. So why the fear-mongering only on healthcare? Another pet peeve of mine about these fear-monger tactics is not only do they scare one to think healthcare costs will doom us, but they add salt to the wound with tidbits such as this, again from Jonathan Clements, 7 May 2019, again at 4:30. Out-of-pocket medical costs devour 18% of the average retiree's income, according to a Boston College study. This excludes long-term care costs. For 6% of retirees, medical costs eat up more than half their income. Notice that excludes long-term care costs. We hear this all the time from the purveyors of doom. Healthcare costs are expenses. You should be worried, and that doesn't include long-term care costs. Well, what about long-term care costs? So let's look at what long-term care costs could be. Thankfully, the good folks at Genworth had this annual study of long-term care costs. And I'm just going to, if you're on the podcast, I'm showing you a table, top-line results from 2018 cost of care study about assisted living, nursing home, semi-private nursing home, private adult daycare, home health aid, and homemaker service. And I'm not going to read each number here for you. Just watch the video or just get the book. What is Genworth? Well, they're an insurance company that sells things like long-term care insurance, life insurance, and annuities. Do you see a pattern here? Fidelity conducts its annual survey on the cost for healthcare and retirement. It finds the costs are high, and they thankfully have solutions. Genworth conducts its annual survey on long-term care costs, and they find the costs are high too. Thankfully, they also have solutions. Whew! What would we do if these firms did not educate us on the cost of retirement and then provide solutions for us to deal with these costs? You probably heard the horror stories too of the need for long-term care. Here's a headline from an article in the Motley Fool. 70% of older Americans could face this colossal expense. Are you factoring the cost of long-term care into your retirement plan? Or this, are you taking steps to address this major retirement concern? Hint, it's an expense that 70% of seniors are likely to encounter. It's not just a Motley Fool with screams with headlines about how retirees have long-term care costs. Here's from MarketWatch. Healthcare will cost $280,000 in retirement, and that doesn't include this huge expense. And here's from USA Today. Retirement planning should include long-term care costs. There are many articles just like this, but the interesting thing is while these articles all talk about the cost of long-term care, they never seem to make mention of the likelihood you actually need it. Here's a good article from Morningstar which published the accompanying table. Usage of long-term care. 52% of people turning 65 will need some type of long-term care services in their lifetime. 47% estimated percentage of men will need some, of over 65 will need some long-term care, and 58% of women 65 and older. 2.5 is the average number of years women will need long-term care, and 1.5 is the average number of years men will need long-term care. 14% of the people who will need long-term care for over 5 years. Now, this table may look frightening at first. After all, more than half the people who turn 65 need some type of long-term care. But then we find 57.5% is the percent of individuals turning 65 between 2015 and 2019 who will spend less than $25,000 on long-term care during their lifetime. 57.5% of people who turn 65 between 2015 and 2019 will spend less than $25,000 on long-term care during their lifetimes. 15.2% on the other hand will spend over $250,000 on long-term care during their lifetimes. In fact, from this study from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and the Center of Insurance and Policy Research, expected long-term care costs from age 65 to death for those turning 65 in 2015 and 19 versus source, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So what we see is no expenditures. 48% of people who turn 65 and above won't spend anything. Whereas, like they said, 15% will spend $250,000. Now I'll tell you too, look at this. From 100, it'll be, 5, 10, 15, 25, 25 plus 50, 73%. So basically 3 out of 4 people who turn 65 from 2015 to 2019 will spend less than $100,000 in long-term care costs. 3 out of 4. Notice this is the expected long-term care costs, not the actual long-term care costs. And even though this is an insurance-sponsored study, it still looks quite favorable for most consumers. Only 30% of the population is expected to spend over $100,000 over the course of their lives. Again, I should have put it in there, but that's the population who actually turns 65. Which of course means 70% are expected to spend less than $100,000, and the vast majority of that 70% are expected to spend less than $25,000. That's great news, but it's just projections. Is there a study that shows the actual expenditures using real-life people? And lo and behold, there is. From the Employee Benefit Research Institute comes a study that, quote, estimates how much retirees spend on out-of-pocket healthcare expenses after age 70 until their death. Unlike many other studies, it includes only expenses for healthcare services actually used, i.e. Medicare insurance premiums are not included. It is based on self-reported expenses of actual retirees and not on projections for hypothetical individuals. The numbers are adjusted for medical inflation and reported in 2015 dollars. The self-reported expenses are from panel data from the Asset and Health Dynamics among the oldest, called the head cohort of the Health and Retirement Study at the University of Michigan, emphasis mine. Did you catch that? This study is not looking at hypotheticals, but actual costs, self-reported by actual real-life people. Interesting, no? One would think a study that takes real numbers from real people would have gathered more notice in the financial planning world, but for some reason it didn't. Wonder why? Well, maybe because its conclusions are, quote, for the majority of surveyed people, out-of-pocket healthcare expenses are not as high as commonly believed. For those who die at 95 or later, the median cumulative out-of-pocket expense after age 70 until death is slightly above $27,000. That's for people who died at age 95 or later. So I'm going to live so long, I'm going to be in healthcare, and I'm going to eat all my money. The median 90th and 95th percentile of average annual out-of-pocket expenses for the entire sample size is about $2,000, $11,000, and $19,000. The median, 2,000 is the median report. So 2,000 is the median. That means 50% of the people spent over 2,000, 50% of the people spent less. The 90th percentile, that means 89% of the people spent less than 11,000, and the 95th percentile, 94% of the people spent less than 19,000. Real live people with real live numbers. Let me repeat what this study reports. The median total cost for out-of-pocket expenses was $27,000 for those age 70 and over. The median out-of-pocket expenses. With a median annual cost of $2,000 a year. That does not sound like a catastrophe the doomsdayers have been proclaiming, does it? Maybe that's why this study hasn't garnered the level of notoriety it should, because it's quite favorable for the average consumer. I can't stress this enough. Your total cumulative median out-of-pocket cost in the entire study was $27,000. The median annual cost was $2,000. Now, the authors do say, but out-of-pocket expenses are catastrophic for some. Again, those who die at 95 or later, the 90th and 95th percentiles are nearly 172,000 or just over 269,000 respectively. Nursing home expenses are one of the biggest contributors driving the skewness of the distribution, emphasis mine. Without out-of-pocket nursing home expenses, the 90th and 95th percentiles for those who die at 95 or later drops to nearly 96,000 and 154,000 respectively. Thus, there is a small minority of folks who have big out-of-pocket healthcare costs, and the primary reason for such costs are nursing homes. Essentially, if you can stay out of the nursing home, there's a significant reason to believe that your out-of-pocket expenses in retirement for healthcare will be reasonable. In fact, for all surveyed people, the median out-of-pocket nursing home expense is zero. For all surveyed people, the median out-of-pocket nursing home expense is zero. Meaning that 50% of the entire survey had no nursing home expenses. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is for you to understand. The numbers completely destroy the premise that the average Joe and Jane out there will be crushed by healthcare costs or retirement. Now, you might be wondering who exactly was surveyed, and rightly so. Thankfully, here's the answer. Quote, this study uses data from the Health and Retirement Service Study, the HRS, from the University of Michigan. In particular, data from the Asset and Health Dynamics among the oldest, the head cohort of HRS are used for the study. HEAD members were born before 1924 and were at least 70 years old of age when they were first interviewed in 1993. After the first interview, they were interviewed in 1995, 1998, and every 2 years since then. The initial sample size for the cohort was 8,335 people. The sample excludes spouses of HEAD members who were below 70 of age in 1993. By 2014, 6,619 members of the cohort were dead. This is the final sample size as the study focuses on the dead members of the cohort and accumulates their out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. As you can see, this is a vast survey with a huge sample size of real people that covers decades. Hard to see how this survey could be more representative of the general population. This is great information. Information you can use regarding your own financial planning. Let me share you with a conclusion. Healthcare expenses are a major risk facing retirees. This study takes a look at how much people actually spend on healthcare after the age of 70 by following a group of retirees until their death. The results provide some important insights. First, for a majority of retirees, these expenses are moderate and are not as high as many perceive them to be. Second, for some retirees, these expenses could be catastrophic. Because it is not easy to predict in advance who will actually have high medical expenses, the risk remains a significant one. I repeat their findings. For a majority of retirees, healthcare expenses are moderate and are not as high as many perceive them to be. Now, the authors do state that the small amount of people face catastrophic costs, and of course that remains a risk. But some folks dealing with catastrophic risk is certainly a whole different issue than what we've been led to believe that most people will. So if you're postponing retirement under the worry of significant healthcare costs, maybe it's time to rethink this. Smash, and we'll do the conclusion, and I'll show you the resources that I have.